Welcome to AI for Lawyers.
Welcome back to AI for Lawyers with attorney Samar and Lawrence Liu through secondopinion.law. Samar and Lawrence help law firms implement artificial intelligence in ways that protect accuracy, supervision, and professional responsibility. I'm Evan Mack, and today we have Samar discussing AI hallucinations in legal research. Samar will explain why they occur, how they show up in practice, and what lawyers need to verify before relying on AI-generated analysis. Samar, sir, welcome back.
Evan, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here. This is a really important and interesting topic that I think a lot of lawyers misunderstand, or they just understand it at a surface level. So I'm glad to be able to break it down with you.
Good stuff. Let's get into it, though. To start, can you explain what an AI hallucination means in the context of legal research and why generative AI systems produce fabricated citations or cases?
Yeah. You know, a lot of lawyers think that hallucinations are a bug, right? Like software have bugs generally. They screw up or they mess up sometimes because of the coding, the underlying coding in the software. But that's not accurate with AI tools in particular. You know, to me, the hallucination is kind of a feature. It's the whole AI system is kind of built or predicated on some hallucination, and there's a reason for that. AI tools are probabilistic model, so the way they work is that they get a word and then they calculate the probability of the next word based on inputs that you've given it and based on the training that it has, and then it goes through and checks, well, does this sentence make sense, right, based on the inputs you've given me and the training that I have. So it's really a statistical model of words, basically, and they check it against context, basically, and training to make sure it makes sense. But nowhere in there is the AI going, is this actually legally correct, right? The sentence is correct usually, right? And it's in the context of what you've asked it, but it does not mean that it's legally correct. So for attorneys to think about this as a bug is incorrect, because it's not a bug. I mean, this is how AI tools are designed. This is how they work. They are not built to, check for legal correctness. So, no matter how good a legal AI tool gets, I would always be worried about hallucination. There's just no way around it. And this is why we built secondopinion.law, right? Our software product. It's not, the underlying engine is not using AI. It's using a deterministic model. And then it certainly kind of adds an AI layer or a component on top of it. And that's, to me, the only way to reduce significantly hallucination. So that's kind of how it works. I think you gotta have that understanding that, hey, this is a statistical model and this is how it performs. And you can, there have been lots of efforts to curb hallucinations in AI models. Like there is this thing called a RAG, or a retrieval augmented generation model, that will look at certain training material or corpus of material for context. And there have been all sorts of efforts that have been made, but in reality, you really hard to get rid of hallucination in AI tools, just because they're so foundational to how the AI tool works.
So when an AI tool, generates a citation that appears legitimate, what makes those errors so difficult to detect at first glance?
Yeah, a couple of reasons. Because I think it's style and confidence. When we work, when I work with a junior associate, like if I see the sentence or paragraph structured in a certain way with certain types of citations or a certain type of syntax, I already have my guard up, right? Because if it's a first year associate, I'm like, I'm not going to trust it. I'm going to verify, and I'm going to verify more than if a ninth year associate gives me something, right? Or a junior partner gives me something, because just the style and the context and the type of citations that are in there. So, there is this stylistic illusion, as I like to call it. And then there's a confidence illusion. So when I talk to a junior associate, and if they're like, I really couldn't find the right case, I think this is the right one, but it doesn't seem right to me, then I'd be like, okay, well, I'm going to look at it, and I'm going to, be very, very skeptical about what's in here, right? But if the attorney comes into my office and they say, yeah, like I've looked at this 10 ways to Sunday, pretty sure this is what it is, I'd be very surprised if there's an opposite citation. I treat that differently as well. With AI, it is always 100% confident, right? It's like, yep, this is what it is. This is the rule. This is the law. And here's your citation. So that confidence kind of throws attorneys off, right? Because we're used to working with humans, and humans are very good at showing or telling when they're confident and when they're not. AI is not like that. AI is always confident. And then, of course, the style that it writes in, is also very polished, right? It's not writing like a first-year associate. It's writing like a junior partner or a high-level associate. So those two things can kind of lull you to sleep, and that's a problem. And then the third biggest one, we talked about this, is the statistical, nature of the AI tool. It doesn't screw up all the time, right? If it did, we would check it all the time, right? And we'd be very careful all the time. But it's like right, let's say 7 out of 7 times, and then the 8th and the 9th time is wrong, and those kinds of things can kind of screw up your judgment in terms of checking these or finding them in the first place. And of course, the final reasons, attorneys don't need me to say this, but they're busy. We're busy. There's a lot to do, and there are a lot of pressures in the legal profession, a lot of deadlines, and having something that sounds right, sounds confident, is also kind of a siren song, right? It's attractive to be able to get things done faster. So that's the final kind of nail on the coffin, if you will.
Fabricated cases, rare anomalies, or their, predictable outcome of how large language models are designed to generate text?
Yeah, it's, like I said, hallucinations are a feature. They're kind of a systematic feature and not a bug. I talk about this Stanford study all the time, right? But they found that general purpose AI tools, hallucinated, somewhere, 30 to 80% of the times on legal queries, right? And even specific AI specific tools hallucinated 1 in 6 times, according to that study. So to me, that's concerning. We're recording this in early 2026. I was trying to count up how many legal decisions have been made about hallucinations in AI briefs that lawyers have submitted. And I think there's over 1,000 already cases where somebody got sanctioned or somebody got in trouble. So that's a big problem. And then the final thing is that, there's really no AI tool that's going to be hallucination free, right? That's I think a marketing term more than anything else. I think you always have to have your guard up, no matter how good the marketing around an AI tool is. That's just how they're built. There's just really very little ways around it, I think.
Beyond entirely, fake cases, what other research failures can appear, in AI generated output, such as, misstated holdings, inaccurate quotations, or incorrect jurisdictional, analysis?
It's all of those, honestly. There's, conflation of jurisdictions all the time. So because the AI tools are statistical in nature, right? Like if there's a lot of California case law, for example, in the training corpus of an AI model, then statistically it's going to think that, the next word should be this because it's reliant on California training model, training data. So even if you tell it, hey, the jurisdiction is Texas, it will still kind of default to its training probabilities, right, before predicting the next word. So even if it's like half of the sentence is about Texas jurisdiction, the other half could be about California jurisdiction, right? It just like makes that switch because it's relying on its training data more so than anything else. So, that's the one I see all the time, is just conflating jurisdictions. Even if it's correct for each individual jurisdiction, it will just kind of switch without even knowing it. Fabricated cases get all the headlines, but you know, even quotes within real cases, it can sometimes hallucinate, right? Especially when attorneys push it and say, "Hey, no, actually, I do remember. I do this. I'm guilty of this all the time, where I have a brief to write, and I'll tell my junior associate, I'm like, "Hey, I remember this case. It's super favorable to us. I'm pretty sure we got this, right? Like, just find that case." Or I'll say, "I think it was one of these two cases." And of course, my memory of that case is overly rosy, right, or overly optimistic. And when they come back and they're like, this case wasn't great, I'm like, no, no, read it again. I think you missed something here. I think there's a better quote in this case. With an associate, they'll push back and they'll say, I don't see the quote. With AI, it will just be like, you're right. Here's the quote, and it's totally made up. So even if the case is real, the quote could be wrong. So that's something to be worried about. And then of course, making a precedence is a problem as well. I think there was a case where a district attorney's office had to withdraw a filing after they found out that the AI hallucinated precedents, right, that didn't exist. So those are kind of the big ones that I see in research briefs, and kind of submissions to the court. But it could happen in really anything, right? Even in contracts, it can screw up obligations, or it can screw up which way the obligations go. In wills and trusts, similar problems could occur in patents and trademarks. You can have it can make up an invention, all sorts of things, right? So it depends on your legal practice area, but it could be anywhere, right? Like any layer of the fabric of that document, there could be hallucinations if you're not careful.
When a firm integrates AI into its research flow, where should verification formally occur so errors don't move downstream?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think you got to have some kind of a human in the loop mandate, right? So whenever an AI touches something and outputs something, there's got to be a human verifying it, before the document kind of leaves the desk of a supervising attorney. So certainly before it goes to the client or to the opposing counsel or to the court, there's got to be someone who's verifying everything that's happening before it goes out. And then I think you got to have some kind of tiered workflow, right? Like there are a lot of things that are low risk, like summarizing a deposition, for example. Not a whole lot that could go wrong, especially if you were in that deposition. You can very quickly figure out, oh, this doesn't seem right. So that probably just needs a spot check, but high risk tasks like drafting a brief, drafting a contract, I think that would require line by line verification. Unfortunately, there's just no way around it.
Is confirming that a case exists enough, or does responsible verification also require checking how the case is described and applied?
Yeah, you got to do it all. And this is where people are like, hey, does the AI actually save me time? And we talked about this, Evan, in one of our previous episodes, is that it may not save you time, right? But it shifts the time allocation to other places, right? Whereas previously you might have spent several hours writing a brief. Now you may spend very little time writing the brief, but you spend way more time verifying what's in that brief, right? So it may not necessarily save you time, but it may change how you allocate your time in a case. But yeah, to your question, confirming that a case exists is definitely not enough. The quotes could be all made up, so you got to verify that. And sometimes, even if the quotes are correct, it gets the context wrong, right? So it may pull something from a dissent, and you'd be like, oh, that sounds great for my case. And then you open it up and you're like, oh, well, actually, the court came out the other way. And the quote that it pulled that's favorable is not even precedent. So you got to look at all that stuff, and you got to read the whole case. I think you can't just read even the citations, because it can kind of mess up the context. Certainly this is what I would do with a junior attorney, like a first year associate. I would read every case that they cite in their brief, because oftentimes they would pull good quotes and helpful quotes, but the case as a whole would be very damaging to our position sometimes, right? So these are the kinds of things you got to check. Just checking that the case exists is nowhere close to enough.
So some more, what practical methods or systems can firms use to cross-check AI-generated research against authoritative, legal databases?
Yeah, I think you gotta check primary sources, right? You gotta open up the document that it's citing to and read it, from start to finish. And then you have to make sure the citations exist. And then you have to also make sure that the citations are appropriate in the context of whatever you're doing. I have this like pet theory that anytime you have a case where there's zero marginal cost, right? So like it costs zero additional dollars to make it, and you have zero marginal cost to deliver it. In those situations, there's spam, right? Like that's just how it works. Like if you take email, for example, right? Like it's zero marginal cost. It doesn't cost you any money to send an additional email, right? And once you've drafted an email, and it doesn't cost you any additional money to send a second email or a third email, right, to a new recipient or the same recipient. So you have a lot of spam, right? Mailboxes are kind of like physical mailboxes, right? Like the mailers that you get are basically zero marginal cost at some point. Not exactly, but basically, and you get a lot of spam in your mailbox, right? So law has always been the opposite, right? Because like each brief was like super expensive, and the delivery of the brief was super expensive because you had to pay court fees and stuff like that. But with AI, the generation of these briefs is becoming zero marginal cost in some way, right? Especially if you're not doing checks and things like that. And the delivery of the stuff is becoming zero marginal cost. So when you have that, you're going to have spam. And if you have spam, how do you fight it? And I think it's with AI, right? Like Google, has spam filters, for example, in Gmail, and the spam filters are basically AI. So you're fighting AI with AI. That's kind of the only way to do it, to do some additional verification. And that's why we built secondopinion.law, right? It runs every output through 4 or 5 different models, AI large language model providers, and says, hey, help me find hallucinations or problems in this text. And some of them will find problems, and some of them will say, looks great. But if we have some kind of consensus around multiple AIs not finding a problem or multiple AIs flagging something, then we can flag that for additional human gloss and review. So that's how we structured secondopinion.law, that like at some point it's going to be impossible to fight hallucinations, and it's going to be impossible to fight AI other than with AI, right? So this kind of multi-consensus AI check that we have is so helpful. And then the other thing we've done is the engine of the product doesn't use AI, it uses a deterministic kind of coded system, and then uses AI as a layer on top of it. But those are the 2 things that we do with secondopinion.law to flag or check for hallucinations.
If an AI-generated citation is discovered after filing, how should a firm address the issue in a way that preserves credibility and professional responsibility?
Yeah, you have a duty of candor, right? As an officer of the court, I think the model rules 3.3 require you to take reasonable remedial measures, right? So if you find it, you gotta go to your tribunal, and it will trigger additional ethical obligations, whether it's to your clients, to the court, to opposing counsel. I think silence is kind of the worst thing that attorneys can do. I think attorneys know this, right? Obfuscation and cover-ups are punished very severely by courts. So I would not do that. I would try to, bring this up to through the leadership chain of the law firm, for example, and then the right third parties as well. I think you have to also understand, Evan, we talked about this in the AI policies episode, but you have to understand how AI systems work, and you have to, preserve evidence of AI chat logs, and you can try to prove to the courts that it was a technology error rather than an intentional malice, right? That's the one that gets attorneys in trouble, much more so than having a problematic citation. You can withdraw the document, or you can file a declaration or a sworn affidavit of some sort, taking accountability, but also logging and explaining how the error occurred in the first place. Those kinds of things go a long way in terms of taking remedial measures.
And to close things out, as AI's tools become, more embedded in research workflows, what structural habits should firms build now to ensure AI remains a productivity tool rather than a professional liability?
Yeah, you got to have formal AI policies in place. We talked about that on the last episode. So if you haven't listened to it, I would say go ahead and listen to it now, because that's kind of the future of how you will guide attorneys into the workplace using AI. And then I think having continuous literacy around how AI works and where does it screw up. I think it's important. Attorneys are very familiar with MCLE, continuing legal education requirements, and I think AI literacy kind of should fall in that framework, especially because it's moving so fast. And then I think you need to leverage external frameworks, right? Tools like secondopinion.law. They give you, all this, certainly we share all this information on our website, and we give you resources about policies and frameworks for implementing AI, but also how we log things for audit purposes and things like that. So I think check out those external tools. Certainly check out secondopinion.law, shameless plug here. But I think those kinds of things also help quite a bit in terms of reducing risk and educating your attorneys onto what to expect and where things can go wrong.
Good stuff, Samar. Appreciate the time, sir.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Evan.
Awesome. Awesome. That's it for today's episode of AI for Lawyers. To find practical resources for building safer AI research workflows and verification systems in your firm, visit secondopinion.law. Thanks for listening. And don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave a review so more attorneys can learn how to use AI the smart way. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.